I was the teen the first time I felt truly powerless. It was a stormy night, and I was home alone for the evening. My parents had gone out for dinner, trusting me to hold down the fort. I'd been looking forward to it all week. A quiet house, snacks, and uninterrupted video games. Outside, the rain pelted against the windows, and the occasional rumble of thunder made the night feel oddly cozy. I had no idea how quickly that comfort would turn to terror. It started with the doorbell. At first, I ignored it, thinking it might have been the wind or a prank. But then it rang again. Reluctantly, I paused my game, pulled on a hoodie, and went to check. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man standing on the porch. He looked to be in his 40s, drenched from the rain, and he wasn't someone I recognized. "Hey, kid," he said through the door. "My phone's dead and my car broke down. Can I use your phone to call for help?" Every alarm bell in my head went off. My parents had drilled it into me, never open the door to strangers. "I'm sorry, I can't help," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't leave. He lingered on the porch, muttering something I couldn't hear. Then he knocked again, harder this time. "Come on, kid, it's pouring out here. Just let me in for a second." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and texted my parents, but they didn't respond immediately. The man knocked again, harder and more frantic, and I started to panic. I turned off all the lights in the living room and tried to make it seem like no one was home. That's when I heard the sound that made my stomach drop, a window sliding open. I froze. Someone was in the house. Without thinking, I bolted to the office down the hall and locked the door. My hands shook as I fumbled to call 911. "There's someone in my house," I whispered to the operator. "I'm hiding in the office." The operator stayed on the line, guiding me through what to do next. But then I heard footsteps outside the office door. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. The handle jiggled, and I thought my heart might stop. The intruder tried the door, muttering something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough to send chills down my spine. The operator urged me to stay calm and find a way out if I could. That's when I remembered the garage. The office had a connecting door to it, and if I could get there, I might be able to escape. Moving as quietly as I could, I unlocked the office door and slipped into the garage. I grabbed the nearest weapon-like object I could find, a rusted crowbar, and made my way to the side door leading outside. The rain hit me like a wall as I ran out into the storm, but I didn't stop. I sprinted to my neighbor's house, banging on their door until they answered. Through tears and gasps, I explained what was happening. They pulled me inside, locked the door, and called the police. It felt like an eternity before the red and blue lights finally lit up the street. The officers entered my house and came out minutes later with the man in handcuffs. He looked calm, almost smug, as if he'd done nothing wrong. When the police questioned him, he claimed the house was his and that I was the intruder. Obviously, they didn't buy it, but the audacity of his lie left me shaken. Later, my parents arrived, their faces pale with worry. That night, as I sat between them, wrapped in a blanket, I realized how close I'd come to something far worse. To this day, the sound of a doorbell on a rainy night sends shivers down my spine. Thunderstorms have always unsettled me, but that night, it wasn't the storm that left me shaken to my core. It was what I found hiding in my room. The power had gone out earlier in the evening, plunging the house into darkness. I lit a few candles, their flickering glow casting shadows on the walls, and eventually, I'd fallen asleep to the sound of rain hammering against the roof. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up, my throat dry and scratchy. I needed water. Groggily, I slipped out of bed and grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight. The storm was still raging outside, and the dim beam of my phone barely cut through the gloom. As I made my way to the kitchen, I noticed something odd. The patio door was slightly ajar, letting the cold night air seep into the house. My stomach tightened. I distinctly remembered locking it earlier. Trying to stay calm, I slid the door shut and turned the lock, double-checking it this time. I told myself it must have been the wind. The storm had been fierce all night, and maybe it had rattled the latch loose. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered as I filled a glass of water and headed back to my room. As I climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier somehow, and the shadows on the walls seemed darker, more oppressive. Then I heard it, a faint rustling noise, like fabric brushing against the floor. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then the sound came again, louder this time. It was coming from underneath my bed. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Clutching my phone, I aimed its light toward the floor. I hesitated, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, but instead, I crouched down and peeked under the bed. And that's when I saw her. She was emaciated, her skin pale and stretched taut over her bones. Her hair hung in tangled, greasy strands, and her eyes were wild, glinting in the dim light like an animal's. She was smiling, her lips pulled back to reveal yellowed teeth. Then she did something that sent ice shooting through my veins. She laughed. It was a low, guttural sound, completely devoid of humor, and it made my skin crawl. Before I could react, she darted out from under the bed, moving with an unnatural, almost spider-like speed. I stumbled backward, screaming, as she bolted toward the hallway. The sound of her laughter echoed through the house as she disappeared into the darkness. My grandfather, who'd been staying with me for a few weeks, came rushing into the room, a baseball bat in hand. Between gasps, I told him what had happened. Without hesitation, he led the way as we searched the house, checking every room, every closet. But she was gone. The only trace she'd left behind was a lingering sense of dread. We spent the rest of the night barricading the windows and doors, making sure every lock was secure. Neither of us slept. By morning, the storm had passed, but the fear remained. We never found out who she was or how she'd gotten into the house. But to this day, whenever I hear the sound of laughter in the dark, I'm taken back to that night, to the woman under the bed, and the terror she left behind. There's something about being in a remote place that's both thrilling and unnerving. My partner, Mia, and I had been looking forward to a quiet weekend at a mobile home nestled deep in the woods. No traffic, no neighbors, just us in the open wilderness. For the first day, it was perfect. Long hikes, fishing in the nearby stream, and an evening spent watching the sunset fade into a canopy of stars. But by the second night, a thunderstorm rolled in, and with it came something far darker than the clouds. The rain began as a gentle patter, but by nightfall, it had turned into a full-blown downpour. The wind howled, making the mobile home's walls creak. We'd just finished dinner and were settling in to play cards when Mia glanced out the window and froze. "There's someone out there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I followed her gaze. At first, I didn't see anything but the rain-soaked woods. Then I spotted it, a figure, standing just at the edge of the tree line. They were barely visible in the dim light, but they were there, motionless and watching. "Probably just a hiker who got caught in the storm," I said, though my stomach churned with unease. "A hiker," Mia replied, shaking her head. "Who hikes out here during a thunderstorm?" She was right. Something about the figure felt off. They weren't waving for help or calling out. They were just standing there, staring. We locked the doors and tried to focus on our game, but it was impossible to ignore the creeping anxiety. Every so often, we'd glance out the window, and each time, the figure seemed a little closer. They weren't walking in a straight line but weaving through the trees, almost like they wanted to avoid being seen. Then came the rattling. It started with the back door. The knob jiggled violently, as if someone was trying to force it open. Mia gasped, and I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy flashlight. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No response, just the relentless pounding of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. We checked the windows and doors again, making sure everything was locked. That's when we realized it wasn't just one person. There were at least two, maybe more. Shadows moved outside each window, and faint whispers carried on the wind. My mind raced with possibilities. Were they thieves? Pranksters? Something worse? Mia found the rifle her father had insisted we bring, just in case. I'd scoffed at the idea at the time, but now I was grateful for it. We loaded it with trembling hands and positioned ourselves near the center of the cabin, away from the windows. The noises grew louder. Footsteps on the porch, scratching at the windows. One of them tried to pry open the front door, their silhouette barely visible through the frosted glass. I aimed the rifle and shouted, "Get out of here. We're armed." For a moment, everything went silent. I thought maybe they'd left, but then came the laughter. Low, mocking, and chilling. It sent shivers down my spine. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, jumping at every sound. Eventually, the storm began to die down, and with the first light of dawn, the intruders seemed to vanish. When we finally mustered the courage to step outside, we found muddy footprints circling the mobile home and deep scratches on the doors and window frames. We packed up and left that morning, cutting our weekend short. To this day, we don't know who those people were or what they wanted. But whenever I'm alone in the woods, I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching, waiting, just beyond the trees.